Thank you. Bob, carry on.
Let's see, am I on the mic?
No, 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 here, I'll turn this one, now you can.
Oh, I'm pushing the wrong thing, naturally. You can see that I wish I had Tara at the time I was with NHTSA in 1970 to get more roadside surveys and help sell those. You've just heard from Tara on 18 different data sets in just a few minutes. I'm about to list 36 program areas, or at least that would be the original intention in my presentation. But I'm not going to talk into what was my part of this system at any length, because you all heard today and on your first session, you heard from people like the Diane Weigel and on the programs also. So there's, don't want to reproduce that, but I think it is important, having heard all of this, that we keep in mind that what we're talking about is a very complex system of dealing with this alcohol problem. And we need to keep in mind the need to deal with it as a problem. We keep hearing very good presentations on individual programs and their importance, but they only work within a large system. So I'm going to just spend a very few minutes reminding you about that system. The system got started back in 1970 when the world finally developed the technology for measuring alcohol in the human being and for relating blood alcohol to human performance and to crashes. And when that happened, we could put into our enforcement systems and give to our enforcement officers a technology in which, rather than being dependent just on their observations and their ability to communicate those observations, we could give them a scientific technology which they could use in the field. Because by that time, we had developed methods for measuring alcohol that could be carried in the hand and that were used breath samples, so that the officer in the field could actually get an accurate measure of the alcohol status of the driver. And this led to the possibility of having so-called per se laws, and we converted a legal system which had been based on describing the behavior of drivers and their appearance into a system in which you had an objective measure. And that system made a significant difference around the world. And one thing I haven't heard too much today, but the committee may want to consider fairly carefully, is that when that system was put in place abroad, it had significant effects. And there are studies available there to show what works, so that it had an impact in Scandinavia. In fact, it became the typical name for it was the Scandinavian system. Let's see, am I good?
Not this side, but this
Oh,
one.
I'm sorry.
This one.
That side.
There you
Okay. By 1970, this technology had been developed to the point where, for example, in Sweden and in Scandinavia, they were stopping large numbers of cars without evidence that they were drinking to check drivers for their BAC. And this allowed a much broader enforcement type of technology. And this was picked up particularly in Australia, but also in Canada, Britain, and France. And all of those countries have research experiments which are worth studying in light of looking forward in the U.S. Now, when we applied this in the U.S., we had perhaps one of the largest effects between 19, and you've heard this a number of times, I think, that between 1980 and 1995, we reduced fatalities by about 30% overall. And for underage, we actually reduced it 50%. And this was by applying the system that was based on the, let's see here. I'm sorry, I've jumped over. Which is based on deterrence, basically. And the ability to get out onto the roadside and be able to check the person for BAC, it greatly increased the risk to the driver that they would be apprehended. And going along with this system then was the ability to apply penalties at the point of arrest through administrative laws. And publicizing this work and then applying heavier penalties, which we did in the U.S. during that period, provided a high deterrence program. But the system was not just limited to deterrence. It was embodied in a large set of laws and programs that lay outside of the driving area, particularly among those were those that are aimed at controlling drinking and at programs that related to the effectiveness of service of alcohol. The one that was particularly effective in the U.S. and is a feature for world to copy is our underage drinking law, which worked very effectively to reduce both the drinking of underage individuals and their crash involvement. But in addition to that, we had responsible beverage service laws, which changed the characteristic of the service of alcohol significantly. And also we had ride programs and other efforts for transportation to and from bars. The effect of this actually went beyond the 30% reduction that we had in drinking and driving, because the per capita consumption of alcohol also fell 20% exactly during these years. Now, which is chicken and egg needs to be worked out. I haven't seen a good study of that, but it seems apparent that the effort that went into controlling drinking as a result of our interest in drinking and driving did lap over into actual total consumption of alcohol. And it's interesting that in recent years, some of the consumption of alcohol went back up, but the benefit we got in drinking and driving between 1980 and 1995 has maintained until possibly the last year or two. And that was very interesting in the context of the research that was done in that era, because most of the studies that we did in communities where we would go in with a community program to deal with drunk driving, you would see a drop, say, in the first year or two, or it would even start as it did in one or two of our projects before we got started, when people heard that there was going to be a project. But once a year or two had gone by, the level of drinking and driving would return to its prior level. But the feature of what happened during that period between 1980 and 1995 was that the fatality rate came down and has stayed down, which is a very important feature. And I think that it's worth a study, or worth in this committee to keep an eye on that, because that was one time, at least when we had a great deal of success. I'll just quickly go through the 5 areas here that were embodied in that period from 1980 to 1995. Of course, there were the systems directed at drinking, which I've just met, but there was also a unique feature for the U.S. that was not picked up strongly abroad, was the effort to publicize and uh, to get the public to support the drinking and driving problem. And of course, that was a major feature of MAD. And we saw that, those of us who were working in the field for the decade of the 70s, that many of these laws that were being developed were out there, but nothing was happening. But once MAD was able to get the public behind it, to a great extent by their publicizing the tragedies involving young children, the laws that were there were more effective, and all of a sudden the passage of legislation increased. And so that whole effort was perhaps more effective, more vibrant in the U.S. than anywhere else. We took that concept to some places like Australia and elsewhere to try to get to let them get the benefit of that kind of a program. And then, of course, there are 2 other areas, the critical ones, the center part of the deterrence concept. The first is the apprehension, and that's where the electronic measurement of alcohol, the development of small devices that could detect alcohol in the driver. Particularly, we took that technology all the way to what was called passive sensing, where we could equip the police officer's flashlight with a sensor so that he could have that at the time when he was at night, which is where the alcohol-related crashes are most typical, and that would pick up a BAC indicator from the driver. Unfortunately, that never caught on. Those of us working on new concepts and technology now might well study why that particular piece of technology did not catch on, even though we could show that it was effective in detecting individuals and also in deterring drivers. Then finally, of course, there were the efforts to increase the severity of jail. And another one it might be of interest to focus some on is the failure to be able to make jail the common and constant penalty for drinking and driving. And that was because of its cost and because of the limitations in the jail facilities. But there were, as part of this overall system, a number of things that did not work, and they can probably be as instructive as what did work. Finally, let me just finish with this. Mentioned earlier the issue of doing having concepts or for the programs we put in. This is an attempt to diagram the program that I'm talking about, falling into 3 areas: the things you do to keep people from driving in the first place, the enforcement that you do, which is then identifies those that are doing the problem, and then the treatment you apply to those that have been doing it in order to prevent them from doing it again. And this is far too small to look at, but it's just but the idea, the concept I want to get across is that this is a system, and it has feedback loops. And if you like, the mathematics of dealing with this and the analysis systems that are needed are complex, and we have to be very careful in looking at individual items because they may well be overwhelmed by the other things that are going on, other parts of the program, which make them ineffective, even though they would seem to be logically effective. So I'll just finish with that. So my
Oh,
Great.
okay.
Thank-
compatriot over here.
Thank you.